Thank you for that. So I'm going to look at the main cloud storage solutions we have. But before I go into that, the question I thought we should look at is, what is cloud storage? Well, it's really just shared storage on a very large computer somewhere in the internet. The amount of data that they store is almost beyond credibility. And my son, who's very involved in this, said they don't measure it in terabytes or petabytes. They actually measure it in weight, the weight of the computer storage devices that hold all of that data. So it's a lot. And people are still confused about cloud storage, but it's not new. As I said on the screen there, your email has used it for years. It's just an extension of what we've always had. So what can you do with cloud storage? Well, you can use it for backing up and recovering your data. You can use it to help you add and change devices. You can use it to synchronize data between devices. So in other words, if I change a file on the machine I'm using just now, and I synchronize it through the cloud, it will appear on a desktop somewhere else that I might use later. You can use it to save space on your devices. Nowadays, with the move to solid-state storage, we have devices that no longer have the huge hard disks that we have some years ago. In fact, we've gone backwards in terms of space, but they're faster and they're better to use. You can use it to access your files remotely. You might not have your computer and want to access a file that you've been working on that computer. A very common use of cloud storage is to allow you to share files and share photos with other people. And of course, as I've just said, you're storing your mail, your contacts, and your calendar all in the cloud. So let's have a look at what I mean by backing up your data. In this diagram, you see that the two devices involved with the red arrows are pushing their data up to the cloud. At the very least, you'll find anyone who has a phone is doing that without really knowing about it. At some point, you might have a problem and you can pull it down to the device that you stored it from. That's very useful. When you get a new phone, for example, we almost all rely on the fact, if we have an Android phone or an iPhone, that when we get a new one, we log in on our account, and almost without us doing anything, in fact, largely without us doing anything, the system gets loaded down. All the settings that we had on the old iPhone appear on the new iPhone, and there's a little delay while the apps that we've selected get reinstalled on the new phone. But after an hour or so, we have a phone that's behaving just as the one we had before. We can do the same thing with a computer. We might get a new computer, and we've stored a lot of files on our old computer. Previously, we'd have to get some USB devices, some flash drives, copy the important things over, load them on the new machine. Now with cloud storage, we log into the same account that we've been using, and the system will load down the files that we need. All very useful and very easy. The other thing I said earlier there, we can synchronize data between devices. So for example, in preparing this presentation, I prepared it on an Apple Mac machine, which I own. And later in the afternoon, when I had it to a stage I was comfortable with it, it went up to the cloud and I transferred to the Windows machine that I'm currently using. And there was the presentation that I've been working on, ready for me to work with. Very handy. The other thing you can do is you can save space on your devices. Now what this diagram is showing is that from the laptop on the left, we're loading up all of our data. But on the phone and the desktop over here, we're loading down only the data that is relevant to those devices. Now, we can equally load all of our stuff up to the cloud, and at some point we can tell the laptop here that we no longer want some files on that device. It takes them off the device, but the file's sitting in the cloud. And if we want it back, we can get it back at some point later. We also can use it to access our data remotely. So what this diagram shows with the yellow arrow here, we have a terminal on the internet logging into the same storage server that we've been uploading to, and we can actually access the data without having a computer at all. The other thing we can do is we can share it with another device. So we can tell someone that we have a file that we've been working on. And an example that is relevant to what I've been doing is that Peter, when he takes your registration for the session, loads onto a file on the internet all the people who want to come to this session. When I want to see who's going to come, I go to the file that he shared with me, and I can check who's coming, which is what I did before the session. So I could probably slow down because I'm talking quite fast. So let's have a look at the different cloud storage options we've got. So working through the table, we've got OneDrive. Now the big advantage of OneDrive is it's native to the Windows operating system. It's very tightly integrated with Windows. And it's been there since Windows 7. And it's become absolutely key to the operating of Windows in Windows 10. But as well as being on Windows, you can have OneDrive for Android, for iOS, and for Mac. And indeed, it's that OneDrive availability on Mac OS and Windows that allowed me to demonstrate, as I just have, that I developed a presentation on the Mac device. And when I was ready and wanted to come to use the presentation device that I use for the Zoom sessions, it was in the cloud, in OneDrive, available for me to use. Another really good feature of OneDrive is that you have a feature called Files on Demand. And what this does is that Windows can actually see files I have in the cloud, but it doesn't have to have them on the Windows machine. However, when I come to open the file, which I do as I would open any other file on my desktop, Windows loads down the file for me, and I can carry on working on it on my PC. One of the downsides of OneDrive is you get limited free storage. You get 5 gig of storage, which in the olden days we would have thought was quite a lot of storage. However, with people storing photos on the devices, it's quite easy to use up 5 gig. However, you get the option of paid storage plans, and we'll look at them in a little more detail in a minute. And the ones that you get for Windows are quite generous and also get you Office. So moving along, we've got Google Drive. And Google Drive has been around for quite a number of years. In fact, since about 2012, I think, if not earlier. It's native to the new Chrome operating systems. If you buy a Chromebook, they rely on Google Drive. But it's been around for Windows, Mac, Android, obviously, and iOS for a long time. Google are fairly generous. They give you 15 gigabytes of free storage. They also give you a really interesting thing, unlimited free storage of high quality photos. Now, what's a high quality photo? Well, it's a photo with a resolution of around 12 to 16 megapixels. Now, that's really quite a good resolution. And indeed, it's better than a number of cameras you'll find around. And they do that by compressing the images for you. But if you use that, it doesn't count towards your 15 gigabytes. The other plus with Google Drive is you get access to the Google apps, to Google's equivalent of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint. The downside of Google Drive is that on a Windows machine, if you want to access Google Drive files, all of the files in the on the amount that you want to look at, all of the files in a folder, for example, have to be stored, downloaded, and stored on your machine. It doesn't do this very nice files on demand feature that OneDrive does. And that's largely speaking to do with the fact that Google Drive is not as tightly integrated with Windows as OneDrive, for the simple reason Google didn't like Windows. Now moving down, we come to iCloud. And iCloud is native to the Mac operating system and to iOS. You can also get an iCloud app for Windows, but there is no iCloud app for Android. It's very tightly integrated with macOS and iOS, and in that respect, iCloud behaves very much the same on a Mac as OneDrive does on a Windows machine. It's got very good storage management. If you're starting to run out of space on your Mac, it will offload files that you haven't been using. But as I said, no Android app. And the final one that I'm going to quickly look at is Dropbox. And I've called it Dropbox Basic, because now when you go to Dropbox, you find that you're actually heading to a Dropbox version that's meant for commercial use. But nonetheless, Dropbox has been around for a very long time. They have apps for Windows, macOS, iOS, and even Linux, which probably not of great interest to most of you, but is a very wide support. So apps for all major operating systems, but very limited free storage. You only get 2 gig of data, and any extra data is expensive. So let's go on and have a look at that. So here are the costs. OneDrive, made by Microsoft, 5 gig of free storage. You can get an extra 100 gig for $3 a month, or a terabyte for $10 a month by subscribing to Microsoft 365 Personal, or 6 terabytes for $13 a month if you subscribe to Microsoft 365 Family. Now, what do you get with Microsoft 365 Family or Personal? You get access to Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and all the main Microsoft apps. So if you're a user of Word or PowerPoint or Excel, it's probably quite a good investment at $10 a month. And at 1 terabyte, I suspect you'll be a long time before you run out of storage. Google Drive, we talked about previously, 15 gig, unlimited high quality photos. And photos are the large users of storage on your devices. So if you can cope with unlimited photos, your 15 gig will do you quite a long time. But if you want some more, $249 a month for 100 gig, $439 for 200, and $1249 for 2 terabytes. iCloud, like OneDrive, only 5 gig of free storage. You get an extra 50 gig though for $149 a month. So half a cup of coffee, you can have 50 gig of storage. And 200 gig for $449. So they're very similarly priced. Dropbox, as I said, expensive. You either have 2 gig, you can get a few extra gigs by referring people to it, or 2 terabytes at $1869 a month. So Dropbox, I think now has changed its focus from the personal user to the real professional user. So how do you choose which one you're going to use? Well, the first thing you look at is what devices you have. As I said earlier, iOS devices can use iCloud, but if you have an Android device and you want it to have storage on it, then you can't have iCloud. What programs do you use? Now, you might find that you've been a user of something like Picasa. If you've been a Picasa user, you've probably got photos stored in the cloud already. And so that would encourage you to go to the Google storage and Google Drive. In fact, yes, where are your existing photo backups? That will be determined in what you choose. Do you want to share photos? That doesn't answer which one you want, but you have to think about, do you want to share files as well? And if you do, what devices do the people you want to share with use? And finally, do you want to collaborate with others? And by that, I mean something like the example I just gave you, where we're taking bookings for the courses in Google Drive, and the presenters who are going to present the courses can go and see who's logged in for a course by accessing the same device. You might even work on a presentation. And a year or so ago, we were working on some big presentations for opening day, and 2 or 3 of us shared the presentation around using the cloud so that we could develop it during the holidays when we weren't seeing people. Now, there's some other things you want to think about when you're deciding what to do with cloud storage. And the first thing I'd suggest you think about is login security. It might be obvious, I hope it is obvious to you, that since we're storing all this data in the cloud, there is the possibility that someone else could try and access your data. So my strong advice is, once you start using cloud storage, that you use a strong password. Or if you're on a device that is PIN driven, you go to a 6-digit PIN. You really want to make sure that there's no chance of your data being accessed accidentally. To be really sure about it, Google Drive, OneDrive, iCloud all provide the feature called two-factor authentication. And with two-factor authentication, before I can log into my accounts on one of those, I have to have access to my phone, and I get a code from my phone that I use as part of the login sequence. That makes it really quite secure. So, final thing to consider is you can use different cloud storage services for files, a different one for photos. The other thing that you're storing in the cloud is device setup details, or you can use a combination of them. And I must confess that I use all 3 of the cloud storage systems that I've referred to. So, almost finished. We've rattled through the presentation sequence quite quickly, and I'm going to go over to question and answer. But before I do, I'll just point you at this final page. We'll be putting the presentation up on the website later today. And if you want to follow up and read up about any of the devices, I'll put the links so that you can follow them. Okay, well, thank you for listening. Let's see and go to some questions. All right, I'll hand over to Greg, and you can control the question.
Could I ask you to stay muted, but when you want to ask the question, unmute yourself, please. So who would like to ask the first question? Just put your hand up. Peter.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Jim. Using the cloud for as backup, what exactly can you back up into the cloud? You can back up your data. I understand you can't back up your systems. So if you lost your main computer, you've got to start again with those. What about things like contact lists?
Okay, Now, the answer to that is it depends a little bit on what your systems are. In the case of an Android phone, an iOS device, you will be backing up all the information you need to know about your systems, and they will help in recovering your system. So you don't back the operating system itself up for those devices, but you back up all the key settings. And when you log in and select your user, you are actually effectively getting a backup of the system loaded down to you. And because all of the apps on the phones and the iOS devices came from Apple or Google in the first place, they can actually automatically download the apps ready for you to use. So if you have the data and the settings and the apps within, sometimes it's an hour, sometimes it's a bit more than an hour, you can be back to where you were. Now, contacts. Contacts are an interesting thing. If you're a user of Gmail, then all of your contacts can easily be stored in the cloud. In fact, you almost have to go out your way not to store your contacts with your Gmail account. And so when you log into the Gmail account from somewhere else, you have access to it. If you're doing it on an Android phone, it will download the contacts. Does that answer your question?
Or if you lost your contacts on your own computer, on your own device, they'll be available back from the cloud?
If you're using Gmail, if you're using Outlook, if you're using a number of the mail servers, they all now store the contacts in the cloud, and you synchronize the contract between devices. It's the way that, for example, with an iPhone, you can put a new contact into your iPhone. It will be passed up to the cloud and downloaded on your iPad, and vice versa.
Very good.
No.
Yep, thank you, Jim.
Also, did you have a question? Can you unmute yourself, Ilse? Yeah, there.
I have a Samsung phone, S9, and Apple desktop and laptop. When I took photos on my Samsung phone, it used to go automatically to Google Photo, but lately it doesn't. Wherever can I correct that?
I think that will be controlled by the Google's Photos app on your phone.
On my phone?
Yeah, there's a Google Photos app and a Google Drive app. You can set to backup from those. And if possible, that someone's turned off the backup.
Me, probably, stuffing around it. So I go to the phone, the Google app or the Drive, and try and...
Either the Google Photos app or the Google Drive app, and make sure both of them are set to upload photos.
Yeah.
There will be a
setting. We did it until about a month or two ago, and suddenly it doesn't do it. So I must have stuffed it up somewhere along the line.
Now, there is one other possibility that could cause that problem, and that's if you run out of your 15 gig of storage. If you've been storing original photographs, then you could have filled up the 15 gig of storage.
So I would have to go to my computer and see how much I've used up.
In your Google Drive, yes.
Google Drive, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
See how much you've used. I've certainly seen that with iPhones as well, where people have been happily backing up the photos, and they suddenly say, my photos are not backing up. And we go and do a quick check on iCloud settings, and sure enough, 5 gig has been used up. So then they go off and spend $1.50 and the problem's solved.
Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, thanks.
What time for one more question, if there are any? Yes, Ron, can you unmute yours?
On the topic of Gmail, Jim, I've got 2 Gmail addresses. So basically all my contacts are under my main address. Are you able to sync them across so that all addresses appear under both email addresses?
Yeah, you turn on synchronization for contacts on both addresses on a phone or a computer, and they will seed between each other.
Okay, that's in settings somewhere, I assume.
That's in settings. I don't know what sort of device do you have.
Oh, I've got iPhone, iPad, PC,
Right.
you know.
On the iPhone, when you define the two users for the email users, you'll find that there's a button or three buttons that say mail, contacts, and calendar. And if you switch the contacts on in both, then it will keep them in step.
Okay, thank you for that.
One more, if you like. We've got a little bit of time, and then
Yeah, we're not too bad.
Yes, Lynn.
Yeah, if you have any of these accounts and you decide that you don't want the account anymore, you want to stop it, will your photos still be there, or are they taken away altogether?
I'm pretty sure of what happens with iCloud. If you decide that you're not going to have an iCloud account, I think you get 30 days to take your photos away. And when the 30 days are up, you've lost access to them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not an accurate 30 days. They're a bit flexible on it, but I would count on having more than 30. So, yeah. I think Google is much the same. It gives you a grace period if you decide to stop things. But once you don't have an account, you have lost access to the things that are stored in the account, which is a good question. You know, you have to be, cloud storage is really useful, and I'm sure we all use it and benefit from it, but it does get you somewhat tied to the accounts that you have. And in particular for photos, once you've stored a lot of photos in the cloud, it's a strong disincentive to move them from the cloud to somewhere else. It can take quite a long time to load down 30 gig of photos, which, you know, it's not hard to reach. In fact, on one of our systems here, there are over 30 gig of photos now.
Yeah, because if you had a full, say, a full storage on your Dropbox, which is 2 terabytes, and you decided that you didn't want to pay the $149 a year anymore, then you would have to go in and get all those photos and put them onto another drive, wouldn't you? Otherwise,
Yep.
you'd lose them.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. You become
challenge.
very dependent on them.
Yeah. So they basically keep you locked into the
Yes, they do.
to pain.
I think Annette's got a question.
yes, Annette, unmute yourself, please. Yes.
Jim, is it possible to upload your emails that come via Gmail to a OneDrive storage?
Yes, I think so. I think you, I'm pretty sure that there is storage for emails allocated. But it's fairly, yeah, I'd have to think about that, Annette. There's always a difficult question.
As you know, I have some considerable problem with my backups that seem still to be making multiple copies of each other. And so I did purchase the 365 Personal. And now I want to know whether I can stick the emails over there, but I don't know how.
I'd have to look at that and think about it. I'm sure there'll be a way.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Before we thank Jim, I'd like to advise you that some of you are coming to the next session at 2:30. You'll have to go out of this session and use the code that Peter sent you to get into the second session. And before we end up, John Dixon is here. He's going to talk about his presentation next week, which is one out of the left field. It's called Noteworthy, and John will tell you what it's about. And we do have some places left if you want to book in for them. John.
Thank you, Greg. Actually, it's called Sing to Your Computer. I was going to talk about Noteworthy Composer, but I've switched to another music notation editor program called MuseScore. I'll be commencing the presentation next week immediately with a short demonstration on entering music notation into a song called O Sole Mio, just the first 9 bars. Any more than that, and I would be boring you silly, I'm sure. After the demonstration, I will talk a little bit about likely users of music notation editors and the relevant attributes of the programs to those likely users. And then after that, a short few comments on 3 music notation editor programs which are readily available. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Well,